So I've decided I'm going to go ahead and harvest these first 2 bags with the very large clusters on them. Now I could let them go even longer to where the teeth were drooping down about a centimeter. But I got farmer's market tomorrow. I like to get these to market. You can see at the top here where I've just got too close with my garden hose on its misting attachment. My water pressure here is a bit higher, so that's what happens when you mist it too close. I did read that the higher water content in it will allow it to bruise easier. So I've now decided that I'm just going to go ahead and not mist them. And I believe that they'll do fine without misting. I just mist everything else. It keeps the humidity up pretty good, plus the pond foggers keep everything up. So yeah, a little bit of bruising here and there on the tops of these, on a few of them. Plus I got to be a little bit better about getting around while misting everything else, just because I kind of almost want to bump these with my elbow. But for some reason the misting from the hose seemed to bruise it worse than anything. But it's still good to eat, although it won't store as long, or that part won't, but you can always just peel it apart and take it off. You'll be able to notice that this peels apart pretty easily. You can always snip the back end and peel from the back end too, like you could with broccoli. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these 2 first bags, pull these mushrooms off them, and weigh them too, and see how well I did. I've tared my scales with a pan, and you can see that it weighs just over 2 pounds for both clumps. So each bag made about 1 pound, which is about standard. And of course it'll keep producing and make more. Just make sure that you pick clean any of the fruit that extended out of the hole. Get the hole clean of any bits. And it'll just regrow from there. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the lion's mane spawn versus the king oyster grain spawn. You can see that the lion's mane never looks like it fully colonizes, but you can tell it'll start making small fruits. And you don't want to let it go any longer than that, because if the fruits get too large, they'll bruise up and cause bacterial problems later on, and it won't store as well. So, but as long as it's like that, that's fine. And that's been in the cooler since the beginning of July, but it'll store probably about 6 months or longer. And you can see obviously the king oyster mycelium has a much more fully colonized look to it. So it's always a good way to identify if you think that you've accidentally switched something up. Like I said before, I goofed and somehow inoculated what I thought was lion's mane with king oyster liquid spawn, and I should have known that that's what it's supposed to look like. Also too, here's a couple extra petri dishes full of agar that I've done of each, so you can see what it looked like. Here's the lion's mane. This is kind of the same way, a lot of small, thick areas where fruiting wants to begin. And then some very wispy mycelium. Wow. You know, as always, the king oyster mycelium is very thick and very fluffy. Looks like snow. You can see that after about 1 week, I have a new flush of lion's mane coming out the old holes. Really, all the old mushroom material that was left in the hole turned back into fresh growing mycelium, which is great. That means there's nothing in there to rot, and it's all going to come out. Now, I tell you what, if you bruise your lion's mane when it's early, you can see that the bruising just kind of expands with the rest of it. You can even see here where it's kind of trying to recover from it. The spines are wanting to turn white again, but overall it kind of has a yellowish tint to it. Kind of it's pretty much what happens to it when it goes past its maturity too, when the spines elongate. You can actually see a few portions of it where the spines have grown about 1 centimeter long. And probably what I'll do, I'll just end up picking these tomorrow before I go a day before I go to farmer's market, so I can get them in the fridge, get them cold, then break them up properly in the packages for the market. And I can see these new ones are coming in nice and bright white. Now, even though that I switched off using a spray bottle to water these instead of the hose, which is bruising them, it still looks like they don't like to be given too much water. I think from what I've read too, that the higher the moisture content in these, the easier they bruise. These ones are doing a bit better where I didn't give them so much. Also too, I figured out that cutting the V flap, as I was doing with these, isn't a good idea, just because it creates a little pocket where water can collect up behind it. And then you can see, for instance, right here, where some water got back there and caused a tiny bit of bacterial problems. Actually, I had to cut a piece out of this one. They got little bacterial problems because of too much standing water behind it. So I really think that not misting it is the best course of action. So you don't have to worry about it all. Just keep your humidity in the room high enough that the tines won't dry out. And you'll notice when they start getting dry, they'll get a crispy edge to it. It won't have that fluffy look to it. And what I might do too is I've noticed that a lot of large mushroom farms, instead of letting their lion's mane get to this kind of size, or even letting it get to any point of the teeth growing out, they just kind of pick it, probably about this size, where it's about 4 inches across. That way the fruit is a bit more durable. It'll last longer in storage, last longer with people handling it, won't bruise. And you really don't have to worry about misting because it's definitely not going to dry out when it's at this stage. So I'll probably end up picking a couple of these bags with fruits a bit smaller, and I will see how well the fruits hold up. And I also want to see how fast the bag puts out the next flush, because I want to be able to get the most money out of the work for this, but also keeping the mushroom quality up as high as I can too. So we'll see if it's more efficient to pick them when they're small like this, and then hopefully have a fast reflush, rather than waiting a whole week after you've picked them when they're large. But hopefully these will put off several flushes before any mold creeps up. Nice thing about doing any kind of project where you only have 2 small areas or so to let the mushroom out, you never have mold spores from the surrounding air get inside there and spoil things. You kind of see this pink oyster bag of grain spawn that I kind of used like a mushroom kit I actually had to dig a tiny bit of mold out of there where I've cut some slits, but that's just because it's grain spawn, and like I said before, grain has that problem where if it dries out a tiny bit, the mushroom mycelium will not be able to recapture it before the mold grabs it. So always want to make sure your grain is kept moist and protected, and obviously too a little mushroom kit like that kind of style would be better mixed with straw or something else to hide the grain inside. So I'm going to pick some of these. I want to see how much they weigh for as small as they are, and we'll wrap up this episode. So finally, some perfectly formed lion's mane. These ones I did not miss once. You can see they turned out great. The teeth are about 1 centimeter long on some of them. So it's about the right time to pick them. You want to get them before the tops of them begin to yellow. And once they, like for instance, you can see how it's getting a little bit of a yellow color on the back side here. Once it starts getting yellow on all the top, the fruit will begin to soften and it won't last nearly as long in storage. So you could pick them at this time or really any time before. And the earlier you pick them, the more dense and hard the fruit will be and last longer in storage. You can see these ones I picked are already reflushing. And then the first ones, you can see they're pretty much ready to pick again. It was very quick, so made a pound off the first ones, and it looks like it's going to make about another half a pound. So there's 1.5 pounds already. And hopefully these bags will last long enough to get close to a 2-pound mark. I went back and, like I said before, I was going to do top and bottom instead of corner to corner. But now I've decided that it's probably best to do 4 smaller holes that I've cut small arrowhead holes with my same arrowhead that I use to poke holes in cottonseed logs. That way it'll more evenly cover the face of the bag and hopefully not get jumbled together, because you can see there's still some contact between the fruits and some open space. So I'm just going to go ahead and harvest these directly into a box. Make sure that you use the flat box to store them. You don't really want to stack them, especially if they're large. Definitely don't stack them more than 2 layers, because they will be delicate and they will be easier to handle and split apart if you need to divide it up for, say, a farmer's market. If you pick them whole and refrigerate them first, it seems to be a bit tougher when it's cold. And also too, if you don't mist them and just have a good humidity surrounding it, that'll greatly reduce any bruising while handling it. So that concludes this episode of Lion's Mane. Hope you get to try this. People say it has like a taste of lobster when you cook it right with butter. I'm not so sure about that, but I've done stir fries and sautés with it. It's very tasty, and it's also very healthy for you. I've got a nice wall of lion's mane back here in the end of my grow room where I haven't even installed lights. You can see they do fine. They don't require nearly as much light as king oysters. So I will see you next time on Mushroom Adventures.